Hello students, the theme of our lecture is forms and types of communication.
The plan of the lecture consists of forms of communication and communication media, types of communication, communication environment, and spheres. There are three main forms of communication that we can distinguish according to their special systems of coding and sending the messages. These are written or print word, oral, spoken word and sounds, visual, pictures, graphics, charts, signs, and etc. Communication media are closely connected with the forms and are the actual channels that use one or another form of communication. Some examples of communication media are books, television, audio and video cassettes, newspapers, radio, and etc. One medium may contain two or more different forms, combining them in a technology aimed at bridging the time or space gap between the sender and receiver of the message. For example, a book may use pictures, printed words, phones, and graphics. Think of how mass media, television, newspapers combine different forms of communication in order to carry the message to the receiver. Let us see how the forms of communication are connected with the media. Every form of communication has its own peculiarities and limitations. For example, we know that spoken word does not last very long. Remember the famous Russian proverb that the word is not a bird, once it is out, it is gone. Another thing about spoken word is that it can be heard only at a distance the voice or the source of sound can cover. Some message recipients are born with certain limitations and are not able to perceive all the existing forms of communication. The variety of communication forms in media helps people to compensate the limited functions of human body, especially those of vision and hearing. It also helps people not to depend on space and time factors in sending and receiving messages. Before reading on, try to answer these questions. What media may help the limitations of the spoken word? What media can you think of that help people to receive messages irrespective of time and space factors? Communication media may be used both intentionally and unintentionally. Nonverbal signals such as facial expressions may communicate a message to someone not intended to receive that message, just like a standing by person may involuntarily overhear a spoken message sent to somebody else. American scientist Edward Sapir has divided the fundamental media into primary processes communicative in their nature and secondary processes that facilitate the communication process. According to Sapir, primary media are language, body language, imitation of public behavior in a process of adapting to ways of society, social hint, implicit process of new communicative acts, and secondary or facilitating media are linguistic modifications, symbolism, physical means development for communication act. Linguistic modifications are related to the code transformation where each unit of the message is transformed into the corresponding sign of a different system. Spoken word transformed into a written message, the sounds are translated into letters, or translation of spoken word into Morse code. These modifications are used when a form of the message is not convenient for sending it to the recipient, time and space. Symbolic systems do not deal with modifications on a unit level, but rather transforms the message as a whole. It is necessary in situations where the message has to be sent and proceed quickly, or a simple answer like yes or no is required. Symbols, signal flags, traffic lights, traffic signs, army sound signals replace longer and more complicated messages in cases where the latter ones could be useless or even dangerous. In an army, where you are not to discuss the order, on a road when you have to take a turn going fast, and etc. Physical means development that is also to facilitate the communication process, according to Sapir, includes such things as railroad and airplane, since they can transport the communicant, telegraph, telephone, radio, since they help to transport the message in various forms. Types of communication. According to the number of people involved into the communication process and their active or passive participation in this process, there are several types of communication as follows. Intrapersonal communication is basically a person talking to himself or changing the interior monologue into a dialogue. as if talking to his inner self, alter ego, conscience, and etc. Interpersonal communication is related to the ideal model of communication and involves two communicants. However, this type may have variations with a passive onlooker, with other witnesses present in a crowd, at a restaurant, and etc. Group communication takes place within a group of people, between groups of people, and between an individual and a group of people. Interview with a political leader or an employer talking to his employees. The different size of groups also influence the process of communication, but these differences are related more to the quality and purpose of communication. Compare, for example, chat rooms and forums and the internet and message boards. Mass communication takes place when a message is received by a large group of people that is not homogeneous in its interest or communication experience, like television, radio, CDs, and audiocast production, internet, mail, as in case of mass subscription. It is very interesting to notice one phenomenon that takes place at a level of mass and sometimes group communication. The message is sent by one person and received by a group, a party, or a nation. At the same time, it doesn't mean that the recipient has just one ear and one brain. Alternatively, the center of the message can also be represented by more than one person and send a message to someone, yet it doesn't mean that all the members of that group speak at the same time. Finally, it can be a group talking to a group, company to company, as in case of discussing price policy, party to party, discussing the candidate, nation to nation, peace or war negotiations. In this case, we can't even hear the so-called naive communicants say, "We have signed a treaty with the Americans," whereas, in fact, they were not even there when the treaty was signed. How does it happen that we make up a non-existent communicant who acts on behalf of a group of individuals? The point is that, like any human invention, it is made to save extra words and make communication more simple and convenient. We understand that the group this communicant represents has common ideas and spoken expressions of those ideas. What this method communicant does is combine and minimize the ideas of the whole group to one common message. It is quite normal for a human mind to synthesize different ideas and give the synthesized a separate name. We are dealing here with so-called emergent phenomena, from Latin emergo, which means to emerge or to appear, which means that in reality they exist only as a multitude of individual acts. But also, human mind tends to not only generalize them and put under one name, but also to personify those ideas under an imaginary communicant. Sometimes it can be a symbolic image, like Uncle Sam, Motherland, and etc. This useful time and energy-saving technology can also become a danger. The danger of this is in the potential tendency of an individual to consider himself a representative chosen to speak on behalf of a group of people and not necessarily support their ideas and hope. Too often we can see this with emergent politicians whose speeches are full of such general notions as us, people, and nation. Think of where else this technique may be used to influence people's thinking and behavior, and what are some examples of advertisement that uses it. Communication environment and spheres. We can say that practically everything that surrounds people is his or her communication environment. Partly, this communication environment consists of things that can be used in communicative functions, and partly it is communication media that serve to convey messages. No message is sent for the sphere purpose of sending it. The purpose of a message is always to influence the actions of the receptor, or in some cases the sender himself, as when he has to reflect on his own actions. Rojestensky has introduced the term rechidestia, or active discourse, to describe the invariable purposeful connection of the spoken word with action. The term discourse can be explained by a simple formula. This discourse is made up of speech and action. That is, we can say that discourse is words said to reach a specific goal and invoking an active response from the receiver. As individuals can interact only in a certain communication environment that can be divided into various communication spheres, discourse becomes institutional. In other words, it becomes connected to the social institutions where this discourse may take place. So, when we talk about political discourse, religious discourse, business discourse, and other, If we regard discourse as a complex of communicative acts joined together by one task and circumstances, we can call it a communicational event. Communicative events happen in all spheres of communication environment. For example, a presentation or exposition can be considered a communicational event in a business sphere. A president's visit as a planned event, or a terrorist attack as an event not planned by the government, perhaps but demanding immediate response, can be considered communicational events in a political sphere. Communicational events that happen in different communication spheres can be analyzed according to the structure of a communicative act suggested by Laswell and described in Lecture 1. However, in some of those spheres, it is quite difficult to distinguish any precisely distinguished elements. Among them are music, architecture, and others. Umberto Eco, an Italian researcher who expressed his opinion that culture is mostly communication, has done his own and quite interesting analysis in a number of communication spheres, such as cinema, painting, architecture, and advertisement. Every communication sphere is an area of specific questions and problems concerning human communication. Let us look closer at the most common of them. The sphere of common communication. This sphere is mostly interpersonal. It relates to the communication that takes place between people in their mundane, everyday life. However, this sphere has certain problems that can be studied. For example, how to talk to a teenage drug addict. The sphere of corporate communication. This sphere raises the problems of the communication between an employer and employees, between employees in the work process, style of documents, and others that ensure the effective work of an enterprise. The sphere of business communication. This sphere touches upon such issues as helping business people develop communication competence for successful cooperation and negotiation with partners. The sphere of political discourse. It is quite popular since the political diversity of parties, movements, organizations, groups, and views requires good knowledge of communicative principles. The sphere of scientific discourse. It is used to be the sphere of studying specific language of scientific publications, but it has brought up many other problems lately, from creating a virtual global scientific community through the internet to organizing such communicational events as scientific conferences and congresses. The sphere of educational discourse. Diversification of education and competition in this sphere has led to necessity of advertisement and public relations consultants. Every institution of higher education has a lot of goals: to attract students, to organize meetings with potential applicants, to test the students, to constantly inform them of the conditions and possibilities of their education are some of them. The sphere of pedagogical discourse. It is a sphere that can be regarded separately, and it concerns the communication that takes place between a professor and a student. The sphere of show and sport business communication. This sphere studies the public image of the stars in show business and sport and their relations with producers and audience. The sphere of international communication. This sphere can be represented by both official and non-official diplomacy and is related to communication where different languages, nations, or cultures are involved. Basic problems of this sphere lie in the area of diplomatic etiquette and protocol. A sphere that is closely related to this one, but has a wider variety of applications in the sphere of tourist industry. The spheres of medical and legislative discourse. These spheres have not been explored until recently, but the human experience proves that words and messages play a major role in these two spheres. How does a doctor relate to his patients to influence them positively? There is a certain gap that has to be bridged between a medically educated person and the patient who simply wants to know how to relieve the pain. In the sphere of legislative discourse, it is very important to interpret the laws correctly and to express the rules and regulations in a way that they would be understood and kept by the society. The sphere of religious discourse. This sphere serves to ensure effective communication when spiritual matters are in question. Hermeneutics is the science of scriptural interpretation that was established because there was a certain need to communicate the message of the scriptures correctly.